Hello, everybody. This is Dan Liebenson, and I am back here with B'nai Lappi for this week's episode of the Oral Talmud. Hey, B'nai.
Hey Dan, how you doing?
Good. It's good to be back with you.
It's good to see you too. Good to be back.
This week you're wearing the Svara t-shirt, and I'm experimenting. I got some new t-shirts, so I'm checking out how this one fits.
I thought we might be twinkies today.
Maybe next week. Um, Usually I wear a Svara t-shirt for these. So one program note. I think our launch as the podcast will take one more week because we are working on some of the technical stuff, like getting a theme song. So that's exciting. But I think I might have said that we were going to probably launch it this week, but it'll probably be next week or maybe even the week after. But it's coming, and so you'll be able to share this with your friends that only listen to audio. So, B'nai, last week we looked at this question that fundamentally you're framing as, how does Judaism think about the ideal human being? And it was framed in the criteria for a judge, for what kind of person we expect or want to be a judge, or what kind of, we might actually, what's described there is more like what we might call a jury today, but which actually in some ways is even more consistent with what you're trying to say about the ideal person, because we're talking about lay people in the role of judging, which is what we call a jury today.
That's interesting. I never thought of that. Yeah, that does make sense.
So, it's interesting to think about what that might say in our day about who's selected for a jury, who should be selected for a jury, as opposed to who's actually selected for a jury in our time. So that would be something to think about. And today we want to really continue that analysis through a related text from a completely different part of the Talmud, but there actually overlap even in the content. So some of the same stories or ideas are present in both texts. So this is also going to be a way where we can refer back to the other texts. But today's text is from the tractate Eruvin, which technically has to do with, I don't know what you would actually call that. It sort of ways around the law in certain clever ways. Famously, people think of an eruv as when you kind of tie a string around an amount of land, and that kind of, in a legal fiction sort of way, weaves together these parcels of private property to create sort of one shared private area. That's called an eruv, but there's all kinds of other eruvs.
Right. I love that idea of legal fictions. That's probably the best translation of this tractate.
Oh, I didn't even say that directly, but I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's a great way to, legal fiction. Right. I love it. So, but this text, as
that's why we love each other. We make each other realize things we say that we didn't think were smart, but end up being smarter than we realized.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. I mean, yes, I totally believe that you do that for me, and I do that for you. So I guess most of the time, the text that we're studying doesn't necessarily directly relate to that topic, but there are ways, especially in terms of legal fictions, that it does. So I think let's jump into that. So can you maybe bridge for us a little bit the previous text and then frame this text?
Yeah, I think both of these texts ultimately have to do with what kind of human being are we interested in creating. And in my sense of the entire tradition, and I borrow this from Rambam, this is not an original idea, is that the entire Jewish enterprise, with all of its technologies, its rituals, holidays, prayers, customs, laws, everything is in service of one thing, and that is the creation of a certain kind of human being, a human being who is deeply empathic, who feels connected to all other human beings, who can not only tolerate, but has a real appetite for contradiction, paradox, uncertainty, complexity, because I think we know that when you walk through the world that way, you do a better job of managing the world, because the world is like that. The world is complicated and so on. And okay, so it's really about what kind of human being are we out to create? And I want to also remind us of something that we've mentioned in the past on this show, which is the idea that Moshe Halbertal, who is a Talmud scholar at the Hartman Institute in Israel. The way he talks about the Talmud, not so much as a normative document, but a formative document. In other words, it was never meant to be a book of laws. It was never meant to tell you how to act. It was there to shape you into a certain kind of human being. So the learning of Talmud and the ideas in it are there to help us be a certain kind of person. And last week's text and this week's text, I think, even explicitly deal with, on the content level, what kind of person should we be? And today's kind of exemplar is Rabbi Meir. So we're going to be looking at this guy and asking, how did he get to be like he is? So that's what's really interesting to me. Not only what kind of person is he who's being held up as this ideal or exemplary human being, but as a parent and a teacher, I'm really interested in the traditions, the Talmud story about how he got that way. So keep that in your back pocket. We should all keep that in our back pocket, because that's where we're going to go next week. Because
well, in
2 weeks, right? In 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, we're going to turn the page backward one and ask, what's the story of how he got to be the person he's described as in today's text?
Right. And I should just note, for those who are confused by what just happened, that the reason why it's going to be in 2 weeks is because next week we have our next guest on the show, who is Ruth Calderon, who is the founder of an important, what you could call a secular yeshiva in Israel called Alma. And she's also been a member of the Knesset in Israel, but she's somebody who has a PhD in Talmud and is very much one of the most important Talmud teachers of our age, and somebody who has really brought Talmud to the world of what in Israel called secular Jews, what here I think we could call liberal Jews, and that, and particularly artists, and sort of has seen the Talmud as both a creative act in and of itself, and I think a font of creativity for those who learn it, which is, like you were saying earlier, about codes and about the idea that the Talmud is some kind of source of norms as opposed to formative, that she's really a representative of the formative idea.
Yeah.
So so before we jump into the text, so next time we look at the story of Rabbi Meir, we'll get to know a little bit more about him. But just to frame for people a little bit who don't know who this character is at all, he is one of the early generations of rabbis, not the earliest. He's, I don't know if you call it the third generation, but he's a student of Rabbi Akiva, meaning he's the next generation after Rabbi Akiva and some of the other people that we've been talking about, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Joshua and Rabban Gamliel and Elazar ben Azariah. That's one generation. And their students include Rabbi Meir. So that's one thing that we know about him. We also know about him that there's lore in the Talmud that he is a convert, right? That he is actually a descendant of Nero, the Roman Emperor Nero, and that he becomes Jewish and also marries. Again, this is a tradition. There, I think one of our guests, I think Barry Wimpheimer, suggested that there's no real evidence of this, but that there's a idea that he's married, meaning historical evidence. It's not clear at all, but that in the Talmud he's married to a woman named Bruria, who's an important figure, a very self-possessed woman, which was unusual at the time of the Talmud, or at least unusual in the reporting of the Talmud.
Yeah.
Probably not unusual at all.
Right. And in fact, she was one of the very, very few women actually named with a name in the Talmud. I think there are 2 or 3. So really few. And she is one of them. So Rabbi Meir is living in the generation right before the destruction.
No.
No?
Right after, I think, because we're talking about Rabbi Akiva. You know, we're talking. I mean, right? We're talking about the destruction is Yochanan ben Zakkai, and then his students are the ones who lived through it, who are Rabbi Akiva and all those folks. And then, I mean, and I think their students are.
Fair enough. I'm bad with dates and numbers. Yes, you're quite right. Right. So he lived not right before the destruction, but right before the redaction of the Mishnah. Okay, great. So
By
this
the way, the main reason I know these things is because I was the translator of a novel about this period. So I had to wrap my mind around the characters, which was actually the greatest gift for me. And one of the things that was interesting in terms of a response that people gave me to the novel was like, oh, it's too bad that you didn't include a couple of pages of like identifying these rabbis and when they lived and what generation they were. And I was like, it didn't even occur to me to do that, because for me, being sunk into the process of translating and wrapping my mind around it, it all became so clear for the first time in my life. And I kind of didn't have that sense of empathy with the reader who hasn't sunk in quite as much to realize that would still be needed. So, live and learn.
Yeah, and reading your book, I realized for the first time, oh my gosh, these people have actual physical characteristics.
Right.
Their face looks a certain way, their body looks a certain. Had never really thought about that.
Well, because the way that we tend to be taught the Talmud, even in the more story-based times, right, even when people are trying to sort of teach things as like that they do interconnect, but it's still playing off of an original way of looking at the Talmud, as if, yes, on the one hand, it's this conversation across the ages, but on the other hand, the people don't really matter. What matters is this statement or that statement,
Right,
or whatever.
right.
So you tend to learn these things as like these separated. Rabbi Eliezer said blah, blah, blah. And somehow you never connect that to the Rabbi Eliezer over here that said a different thing, and ask the question, well, how does that fit with that? Now, the Talmud sometimes does stuff like that and says, well, how does this connect to this other statement that the person made in a previous time? But at least my experience studying Talmud tends to be like, that's they knew something. I can't really even follow that. So I'm just kind of looking at the logic of what they're saying. But what the novel really does is it actually pulls all those stories together and creates characters out of these people, including physical characteristics, but also their philosophical characteristics, which I think we talked about a little bit. Like, I'm starting to have a different view of some of that from Yochi Brendis, the novelist's view. I think she's trying to harmonize certain things, and I'm starting to think, well, maybe the historical characters were actually quite different from the legend characters that were written a few hundred years later. And Rabbi Meir, is one of these. I mean, like, he's seen, right, his what he symbolizes is kind of a like next level genius, right? A next level kind of creative thinker. We'll get to that in today's text. But so much so, right, that he's not named in the Mishnah?
Right.
Because it was just kind of, well, we'll see a little bit, but that's a key context, that Rabbi Meir is not named in the Mishnah, even though he's an important rabbi and he's talked about a lot in the Talmud, but he's not a character in the Mishnah.
Right. Some think that the anonymous opinions are his, but the fact that he's not named might even be the driving fact behind this story. It's like, what's going on here?
Okay.
But we'll see.
So should we jump into the text?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So again, we're in Tractate Eruvin 13b. And for those who are newer to this show, there is a Sefaria source sheet. You can find that link on Facebook or on our webpage, which is www.jewishlive.org/Oral Talmud. And you can get the link to that Sefaria source sheet if you want to read on, but we're sharing it here, so you don't have to right now. So the text begins, Rabbi Acha Bar Chanina said, "It is revealed and known before the one who spoke and the world came into being," i.e. God, that in the...
And by the way, before we just run over that particular name of God, every time you get a specific name of God in a text, you have to ask yourself, why did the rabbis choose this particular name? There are probably more than a dozen names of God. The Holy Blessed One, the Merciful One, the Great Compassionate and Merciful One, the One who spoke and the world came into being, and so on and so forth. And I don't think it's just an accident that they grab one name versus another out of the air. So I think the name that the one who spoke and the world came into being, a being, an entity that creates worlds with words, I think is an important idea to keep in the air. So that's the God who's being invoked here. And this particular God, says Rabbi Yacha Bar Chanina, we know, said the following: it's revealed and known before this God. In other words, absolutely perfectly clear before this God that.
By the way, I think it would be interesting to go back to some of the texts that we've studied and look at what name of God was used in those texts. Like I remember the text about Rabbi Akiva and the crowns being tied on was, I believe, the Holy Blessed One, as was the text about the mountain being held over the heads. I'm not sure about the Oven of Achnai. What I think
that was the bat kol.
Bat kol, so not even using the specific name for God, more like a heavenly voice.
Right.
And so it would be interesting just to track whether some of these more radical texts use one or the other, or whether they're trying to, when they're using the Holy Blessed One, maybe it's even a more powerful reversal. It'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, I've never mapped them, but there's a PhD dissertation in that. I think
maybe somebody's already written one. If you know, by the way, let us know if there is a PhD dissertation. We'd like to interview that person. So Rabbi Yacha Bar Chanina said, it is revealed and known before the one who spoke and the world came into being, that in the generation of Rabbi Meir, meaning that third generation, I don't know if it's called the third or the fourth generation, but that generation of the students of that first group of the Knights of the Round Table,
right.
that in the generation of Rabbi Meir, there was no one of the sages who was his equal.
Okay, so this is a big statement, right? It's like God saying there's nobody like Rabbi Meir. He's it. He's the real deal. He's the best. That's a big statement, right? So right. I'm kind of interested to know, wow, God thinks he's the best of everyone in his generation. Well, what kind of person is he? What makes someone? Now, I'm saying best. Actually, the text doesn't say best. It says there was no one like him. But still, I have a sense that it's suggesting a positive valence. What do you think?
Well, first of all, you said two things that didn't occur to me. One, I'm such a bad reader, I think, that I kind of, even though we just talked about it, I kind of glossed over the whole God part, and I was like, okay, something about God, and Rabbi Meir was the best student, as opposed to what it actually says, which is, like you just said, that God knew that Rabbi Meir was the best or whatever, and so I think that's a question that maybe we should sort of keep in mind as we go on. Like, it's not necessarily saying that anyone else knew. It's saying that God knew.
Yeah.
And number two, that where it says no one was his equal, does it mean the best? I would read it that way too, but I think it's interesting to consider another possibility or other possibilities, which maybe we will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
There was none like him. Yeah.
That the originals really should be translated as there was none like him.
Like him, I suppose.
Because that's moto, right?
Moto, right.
Yeah.
And this expression, galui viadur, revealed and known, that's a kind of a revealed and known before God. That's a set phrase, and it appears all over. And it's the idea that you should accept this as divine truth. This is objective, capital T truth. So pay attention here. It's not just the opinion of someone. This is truth. Okay, now I'm sitting up straight for this.
Although what I'm just interested in, we don't have to discuss it now, but I'm interested in the move that says, like, the way that we say this is a known truth, we say that God knew it, but in all these other texts that we've looked at, the fact that God thinks something is not necessarily of paramount importance to the rabbi. So that's an interesting.
That's true as well. Plus, what a chutzpahdik move to say, I know for a fact what God knows for a fact. That's funny.
Well, probably another rabbi ran into Elijah the prophet and he told him that. So.
I guess.
Okay. So, so why, the Talmud asks, then why didn't the sages establish the halacha, meaning the law or the tradition, in accordance with his opinions?
Right. So if he's so great, how come we don't have any record? And in fact, in his own generation, no one said, oh, yeah, you're right. We're going to make the law just as you say it should be. They never did that. Well, that's surprising. really
Mm-hmm.
surprising. If you have this guy who is presumably so great, so smart, so wise, so who knows what, why wouldn't you, like, he seems to know God's will, kind of the way in the Oven of Achnai story, Rabbi Eliezer is identified as always being right, always being, his opinion is always in accordance with God's will. How come they didn't set the law according to him? Wouldn't you want the law to be as God would say it should be, or as the person God identifies as the greatest says it should be? That's funny.
Although that is consistent with the things that we've been studying, where that's not necessarily the case, right? Where
Absolutely.
where it may be the opposite of the case. So that's an interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a wink in the question. It's like,
Uh-huh.
wouldn't you want that? No, actually, that is not at all what we want.
Uh-huh.
But
And so the Talmud answers, because his colleagues couldn't, and now this is a place where you changed the translation, because the translation made it much simpler, but the
yeah,
original is, they couldn't stand on his colleagues couldn't stand on the end of his mind. You want to
yeah,
talk about what it says and what that means?
yeah, I wanted to add a little bit more ambiguity back into our translation, because I don't think it's completely clear what it means. It seems to be saying something like, it's either they couldn't really suss out what he was talking about, or they couldn't tolerate the implications of what he was saying, or they couldn't figure out if what he was saying was what he actually believed,
Mm-hmm.
or he, you know, and the text itself is going to flesh out the opacity of this phrase, they couldn't stand on the end of his mind. So let's go to the text's own fleshing out and see maybe what it might mean.
Okay, although I just want to say, from the perspective of a translator and of the original, that the Hebrew says la'amod al sof da'ato, which means, now la'amod, to stand, which you've translated correctly as stand. It's absolutely a correct translation, because in English we have the idea of stand, like I can't stand it, right? Like
Yeah.
it's too destabilizing, something like that. And also
Mhm.
I can't stand, meaning it's unstable. It's I can't, right?
Mhm.
And on the end of his mind, that is a reasonable translation. I don't have a better one, but sof da'ato could also mean, like, kind of at the end of his statement, at the end of his opinion, maybe would be another way to put it. That and meaning that, like, they couldn't stand on the end of his opinion, meaning it's not clear that it is the end of his opinion, right? Like that it's like, wait, he says something and then kind of stops. I mean, I kind of think of people that I know that are kind of, they stop talking and you're like, did you finish the statement? Like I'm kind of confused still, or like, is that really what you're saying? Or I'm waiting for the next sentence and it never comes, and so then I'm kind of like, I don't know, is that the end, right? And what we're going to read feels like something like that.
I like that. I never thought of it exactly that way.
So the explanation is that they couldn't stand on the end of his mind, because he would state, with regard to a ritually impure item, that it's pure, and he would justify that ruling. And likewise, he would justify that ruling with logic, right? I mean, with reason. And likewise, he would state, with regard to a ritually pure item that is impure, and justify that ruling. And then the explanation from Steinsaltz, from the original translator, is that the sages were unable to distinguish between the statements that were halacha and those that were not, right? Meaning that if he could easily explain to you why a ritually pure item was impure and a impure item was pure, then how do you know which one he actually believes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple things to get on the table here. Let's notice that, just like last week's text, the subject matter here is ritual impurity and impurity. And I'm really convinced, this is my own theory, but I'm convinced, I'm sure some scholars, I'm not a scholar, I'm not an academic. So it could be that some scholars and academics have already talked about this, and I've only stumbled onto, the inkling of this idea on my own, but I feel quite confident that every time the rabbis are talking about whether something is pure or impure, it's a signal to us. It's a signal of legal plasticity, the topic of how far can we go in changing, overturning, uprooting, and the answer is always infinitely far. There's nothing, if something that is ritually pure or impure can be changed or argued to be the other thing, everything else is what they call a kal vachomer to that. In other words, everything else is the easy case to that hard case. So let's notice that they're talking about ritual purity and impurity. So we should know in our heads, oh, they're talking about how far can we really go? It's that question again. It's how radical can we actually be with our received tradition? Yeah, so he seemed to be that annoying guy in the Beit Midrash who, you know, would take something that was clearly a cup of coffee, and by the end of his argument, he'd prove to you that this was a glass of milk. And you'd go, oh, what? Yeah, yeah, as a glass of milk, right? And because you couldn't be settled, and I like your translation of destabilized, he was destabilizing, because you couldn't sort of relax and go, oh my God, is that a glass of milk or is that a cup of coffee? You couldn't trust that you should just set the law according to Rabbi Meir, because you're not sure if he's trying to destabilize you or he's actually trying to prove something. And one of the implicit questions, I think, is why would he want to be destabilizing everybody?
And if so, I mean, on the most simplistic level, the point is like, if we knew what he thought, we would totally decide according to his opinion, but we just never knew what he thought. So
Yeah.
so that's the simple reason. And then the more complex point of view in it is like, and why did he want to be that way? Like, what was he after? What was and by the way, I don't think that any of that is necessarily in contradiction to the idea that nobody was his equal, right? I mean, that there's some idea that this is the biggest genius in the world, and that's true. I mean, that's so true that we're saying, you know, God knew, right? Meaning, like, we're establishing that as a fact. In a similar way to when I'm thinking about it, when we did the text of the mountain being held over the people's heads, and the one rabbi said, and therefore the Talmud is and therefore the Torah is a contract under duress. Nobody actually argued with him. Everybody said they accepted it. Yeah, that's what happened, and it is under duress. The argument was like whether it was ratified in the future. So in a way, there's no argument here. He's the best, but this is how he conducted himself, and why?
Yeah. Okay, so the text is going to, I think, give us an important piece of that answer right now.
All right. So it was taught in a breita, and I'm not sure if we've talked about a breita before, but a breita is a piece of literature, a piece of lore that they had or claimed to have in the later years of the rabbinic project, before the Talmud was written down, and it was said to be from the contemporary period of time as the Mishnah. So it was kind of the outtakes of the Mishnah, or the stuff that, you know, was on the cutting room floor, but they take it just about as seriously as the Mishnah, which is interesting, maybe something to talk about sometime. But so they say it was taught in a breita that Rabbi Meir was not his name. His name was actually not Meir. Rather, his Rabbi Nehorai was his name. And why was he called by the name Rabbi Meir if his name was actually Nehorai? Because he illuminates, which is the translation of Meir, the eyes of the sages in matters of the halacha.
Great. Okay, let's stop there a sec.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what to make of by the way, Nehorai is an Aramaic word, and it is the translation into Aramaic of the word Meir. Meir is Hebrew for to make light, to enlighten. Nehorai is the same thing. I'm not sure what to make of that piece of lore, as you say, but the fact that he is being labeled as illuminating the eyes in halacha of everyone else, I think is really important. What it's saying is, they couldn't trust what he was saying was what they should make the practical norms. But without him in the conversation, pushing them, destabilizing them, complicating, they couldn't arrive at a norm that was as good as they were able to with him in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, this surfaces that the halacha, the norms, are a kind of accommodation to a lower reality. That the world and the complexity of the world exists in a much bigger way than the law is able to embody. And he wanted to get their feet off the ground. He wanted them to be in the awareness of the larger, complicated truths of the world, so that when they had to make some law, knowing that it would be inadequate to that larger truth, it would be at least bigger than it would have been otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what his gift was.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. What do you think of that?
No, I agree with that. I mean, it's interesting because I actually relate to it in the sense that sometimes people, including my dad, will ask me in a way like, well, what's your vision for the future of Judaism? Because I talk so much about that we're on the cusp of a new era and all of this stuff. And I tend to say, I don't think that's actually my job. Like, I don't think I'm necessarily good at that. I don't think that that's what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to lead us toward a particular future Judaism. I'm trying to foster a project of working on that challenge. And so, and actually part of that project is to be kind of a contrarian and to say, look, I can definitely tell you why the old Judaism is not going to make it. I can also be pretty critical of everybody's idea of what the new Judaism would be. But that doesn't mean that I don't think that one of those ideas will make it. It means that I kind of feel like that's my job in the world. But you get a lot of pushback that says, but that's not a good job. A good job is to be decisive and to be the one who like says, this is how it's going to be, and I've pushed back against that. So I relate to it. Not that I'm the greatest light of the world. But I relate to the idea that there are different jobs in the world, and one of them is to kind of push forward the project of just think. I guess that's another piece that I'm constantly trying to say, like, can we just think? Can we just have an open mind? Can we just push ourselves to not stop as soon as some interesting idea comes along? Can we keep pushing through that and say, well, maybe there's a better idea? And I understand that there's a limit to that. At some point, you have to choose a path, but let somebody else play that role.
Yeah. And as a yeshiva, my project is to create as many Rabbi Meirs as we can create. There will always be the guys around the table who will say, hey, we need to know what the law is. So we don't have to worry about making those kind of people.
Right.
They're always going to be there. But we need at least one Rabbi Meir in every generation. And gosh, what would the halacha look like? What would our path, our best guess at what God wants of us look like if we had a whole bunch of Rabbi Meirs at the table?
Although if everybody's a Rabbi Meir, then it's chaos and we'll never get anywhere. I mean, that would, I think that's probably right.
Yeah, fair enough. But I'm not worried about that. There will always be I don't know what to call the other ones. There will always be the like practical, whatever. Just tell me what to do. Let's just figure out what we're going to tell people to do. All right.
Absolutely. That is the natural human desire. And again, I'm just trying to say also that, like, I'm not critical of that. Meaning I think that there's a place for that as well. It's just that there's a place for the Rabbi Meir too. And maybe a more important place, maybe an equally important place, but it's something that tends not to be valued. It's something that tends to be, people tend to be annoyed by it because it feels like lack of decision making. It feels like just being smart for the sake of being smart. It's like a smart aleck. It's not, and I think that a lot of the people that are trying to do that are like, no, that's not what I'm doing at all. Like I'm trying to
Yeah.
get us all as collectively to be more creative than we would have been, because I know that the tendency of an object is to remain at rest, right? Or
Yeah.
is that a thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
You're,
an object at rest tends to remain at rest, right?
yeah, I think that's it. Rabbi Meir reminds me a little bit of my father, Alav Hashalom. He loved to argue in the sense of debate. And it was always frustrating because I never knew if he believed what he was arguing about, if he believed in that position, because often he didn't. He just loved the kind of mind expanding, or I presume he was hoping to expand my mind. But that exercise of let's dig into this, let's figure out what's under the surface, and make our thinking bigger. But it was also annoying for sure.
For sure, yeah. And I suppose there's something that, like, as I think about that, like, I'm not sure that either one of these is bad, but I think that there's one kind of person that I aspire to be. I mean, whether I actually achieve it, but that's saying, like, my goal is to keep us pushing past the easy answer and just to make sure that we're surfacing all the possibilities and, let somebody else make the decision. I'm not against somebody making the decision. I just feel like my best role is to, fuzzy it up and make sure that we're really, really thinking. But I also know that there are people who argue for the sake of arguing. I don't think I'm one of those, but I could easily imagine that I could be regarded as one of those. And I wonder if it's a continuum, and your dad and I are the same, just maybe slightly along a continuum, or there are two different versions and one is more laudable than the other. I don't know.
Yeah. I think I like the idea of a continuum, because I don't think my dad was exactly like Rabbi Meir. There is sort of the annoying end of the spectrum.
Right.
Love you, Dad. But there was something bigger we need to get to, and that's what everyone on the spectrum somewhere, I think, is onto. And I love the fact that this guy, who they could never pin down, is recognized as having this crucial role. And they imagine God saying, which was their way of saying, this is really good, that he was sort of the best of his generation. Okay.
So I don't know. Do we want to continue with this? I mean, the next part is just saying, well, if Rabbi Meir was actually named Nehorai, then who is Rabbi Nehorai when that's talking about, and then there's kind of a whole chain of, well, Rabbi Nehorai was actually this other guy. Well, what? And then who was that other guy? But there's, I'm not sure that we need to read that part.
I'm happy to skip it. I don't know what to make of that part. For me,
okay. I mean, there is something in it, just where they're saying, like, well, if Rabbi Nehorai was actually Rabbi Nehemiah, but maybe he was Elazar ben Arach, and Elazar ben Arach is an interesting character. That from those early days of rabbinic Judaism, he was also one of the students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he's actually somebody who kind of goes off on his own and secludes himself, and as a result forgets all his Torah. So he's an interesting guy. It's interesting that the chain of events, goes from the most brilliant guy who can make any argument to the rabbi who forgot all his Torah. So, maybe there's something there that, bears some investigation, but I think it's going to deflect us from our agenda for today. So let's not.
All right, we'll put a sticky on that.
Put a sticky on it, yes. So the Gemara relates that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who was the person who compiled the Mishnah, kind of the editor of the Mishnah.
Right. So who is really standing on Rabbi Meir's shoulders. He's understood to have really admired and taken Rabbi Meir's. There was something about Rabbi Meir's work that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was using to make his Mishnah. I don't know too much about it, but Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was a student of an admirer of Rabbi Meir.
So Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi says, the fact that I am sharper than my colleagues is due to the fact that I saw Rabbi Meir from behind, which is explained here as I sat behind him when I was his student. I sat behind him when I was his student. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think, when we think about the yeshivas that these guys had, what we have to picture is not like a yeshiva today. It was probably a tree. It was the grass under that tree, or the grass under that tree. And I think they were sitting often outside around, completely encircling their teacher. So if you imagine a teacher with a bunch of students, sitting on the grass around him, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is saying, my place on the grass was behind him as he was facing, think of it as like a concert in the round or something. He would be facing that direction, and I'd be sitting behind it. I never got to see his face. But, I'm so smart because I got to see a little bit of him. I got to see him even from behind. And in just that shaped me.
And the implication has to be that my colleagues didn't get to study with him at all, because he then says, had I seen him from the front, I would be even sharper, as it is written, and your eyes shall see your teacher. That's from Isaiah. So that you're, if you're actually looking at a teacher, you absorb more. But ostensibly, there were other colleagues who were sitting in the front. So the only way to understand, I think, what he's trying to say here is that none of his present colleagues got the chance to study at all with Rabbi Meir. And since he got to study with him even just a little from behind, he's sharper than the rest of the people, right?
Yeah. And I think there's a lot to be surfaced about, what could this mean from behind, from front? What is someone's face? I think there are metaphors in here that could be unpacked, but probably want to put a sticky in there as well, unless something's coming up for you.
Well, one connection that I would just make is that, the sort of previous great founder, let's say, which was Yochanan ben Zakkai, is talked about in the Talmud as the youngest or the last student of Hillel. So it's just interesting to think about that there's this kind of tradition of the last student, so the last standing student in some way, that takes on the mantle of their teacher. And I think that's interesting in terms of, just how the Talmud thinks about what the chain looks like. I'm not sure exactly what to make of it, but it's not the only case like this.
Yeah. Okay, this next piece,
okay,
I think is really interesting.
All right. So,
and vexing, and I don't totally get it.
Okay. So Rabbi Abahu said that Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Meir had a disciple, and his name was Simchus, who would state with regard to each and every matter of ritual impurity 48 reasons in support of the ruling of impurity, and with regard to each and every matter of ritual purity, 48 reasons in support of the ruling of purity.
Okay. All right, let's stop here. Okay, so in this section of the text, we're going to have a little snapshot of two different students of the time.
And by the way, I'm just not sure that I read that right. The point is just that this guy Simchus could tell you 48 reasons why something was impure and 48 reasons why something is pure.
Right. Meaning 48 reasons why something that was known to be pure was in fact pure. He could, this is a coffee cup. Everybody knows it's a coffee cup, and I can prove to you that it's a coffee cup in 48 different ways. This is my watch. I could, or the glass of milk, whatever. He can name what is and prove what is.
So this is not the guy, this is not Rabbi Meir that can make arguments for both sides. This is a guy that is just great at making a million different arguments for one side.
Exactly.
And he's always on the winner's side.
Right. He's always like calling it like it is. He's Mr. This is what it is. I'm not sure what to make of him, except that I know just a couple things to bring out. First of all, his name is Simchus. It's a Greek name. Not sure what to make of the fact that this student has a Greek name. Typically, students with Greek names, you have to imagine that they are assimilated. You have to picture some kind of, I'm not sure. There's that. And I'm wondering, why is the Gemara invested in describing this student as like Mr. Straighty, basically? Is he saying, is the text, and I really don't know, is the text saying, okay, this is Rabbi Meir's student, and you should know that in spite of the fact that Rabbi Meir could prove that something which was black was actually white, and something that was white was actually black, he had the student who, his students weren't confused. His students knew what was what and could be. I'm not really sure. But this seems to be a student who was that kind of a straight thinker. I don't know. What do you make of this?
No, that was actually a very generous reading, which I appreciate. I mean, I kind of, as I was thinking it through, I was thinking like, this is a way of saying Rabbi Meir had this student who just didn't get it.
Yeah.
This guy thought that the point was come up with a million different arguments and show how smart you are by showing that you could prove this thing a million different ways. But if the thing is the way, if the thing is the way that we're saying it is, you only have to say one reason. Like 48 reasons. Like this guy was kind of, he's kind of an imbecile, but like everyone thought that he was smart because, and I know these people, like that are particularly in law school, that they just kind of, and that's not what actually makes somebody a great thinker. What makes you a great thinker is that you can come up with the reasons that it wouldn't be the case that, and maybe, maybe again, when we were talking about like, this is the kind of guy that we also need, this is the kind of guy that makes sure that we are making decisions, and maybe in some way, like telling you 48 reasons, it kind of helps feel good about the decision, but it's not what Rabbi Meir was trying to teach.
Right. I love it. I like your read that this guy didn't get it, especially in light of the student we're about to see.
So, but what's interesting is that this guy, that Simchus has a name.
Yeah.
And our next student does not.
Right.
So it was taught in a Breita. There was a distinguished student at Yavne. Actually, it doesn't say there was a distinguished student at Yavne, right? It was
Talmid Vatik.
Oh, Talmid Vatik.
A veteran.
So we should have, this just got unbolded. It should have been bold. But,
sorry. That was my fault.
It's okay. So it was taught in a Breita. There was a distinguished student at Yavne. Yavne being this main academy in those early days of rabbinic Judaism. There was a distinguished student at Yavne who could, with his sharp intellect, purify the sheretz, which we could translate as a creeping animal. You often say a creepy crawly. So he could purify the sheretz, explicitly deemed impure by the Torah. Like the Torah explicitly in the text of the Torah says a sheretz is an impure thing. And this distinguished student could give you 150 different proofs to tell you why something specifically said to be impure in the Torah was actually pure. So this is really kind of the opposite of Simchus.
Right, exactly. And this is the only other time in the Talmud that we have this idea that we got last week in Sanhedrin of the kind of the, not only the possibility of overturning the Torah, but the ideal characteristic of having the moral sensitivity to know when the Torah needs to be overturned and to have the ability to do so. So there are two places in the Talmud that explicitly name that, and it's talked about as being able to purify the sheretz, purify one of those 8 definitionally impure creatures, to be able to say, in spite of the fact that God deemed this thing immutably impure, it's actually pure and I can prove it to you. To be able to do that is seen as the ultimate in humane, it's like the ultimate skill set for humanity. And I think that's just a really powerful thing, to be able to take what that the last generation's best guess at what God thought was true and say, you know what, I have a better guess, and I have enough confidence. I'm so able to see the harm it's causing, and enough confidence in myself and belief that God wants me to have the confidence in myself to overturn that I'm going to do so. And I'm going to maybe even radically alter the tradition or our world.
And he could do it 150 different ways, right? I mean, meaning it wasn't just like one clever comment. As we'll see, actually, the next thing is like an attempt to do it with one clever idea, but he could do 150. So you don't like this one, I got another 149 for you.
That's right, which is even goes further than last week's text. And at this point, I'm reminded of a piece that we forgot to bring out in last week's text, which was the idea of being able to purify the sherets. The part that we skipped was that the phrase right after to be able to purify the sherets was from the Torah. To be able to purify the sherets from the Torah, meaning using the tradition itself to overturn itself, using the Torah to say here, to say the Torah over there is wrong. In other words, to use, practically speaking, what it's saying is you don't have to stand outside of the tradition to fix it. That if you realize where the tradition is wrong, that doesn't put you outside of it. That puts you squarely in the center of it, standing on the shoulders of the greatest ones who have the ability to, from the inside of the tradition, using the Torah's mechanisms itself and ideas itself to overturn it.
It's it's confusing because it's a little confusing because the idea that something is explicitly that stated in the Torah and that you can overturn that, on the one hand, it's like, how could you do that? Well, there's some internal logic that maybe you could use. But the other thing that it's making me think about is just these previous sessions that we've done where they explicitly overturn things from the Torah using a twisted form of content from the Torah, and maybe that's all they mean, which is much easier, right? I mean, if the idea, because option number one is that it's explicitly stated in the Torah as impure or not allowed or whatever, and somehow we come up with some kind of logic to show some kind of, but maybe we define that away and we say a sheret is just, like a sheret is impure, but this thing that we've been calling a sheret all the time, that's not actually a sheret, there's all kinds of ways that maybe you can make that argument. But there's another way that you can just kind of say, well, or you could say, well, like there's two contradictory things in the Torah, and we can say, well, we're going to pick this one over that one. You could argue actually that what, for example, some of the folks that have been trying to do with the terrible verse in Leviticus about homosexuality, is saying, yes, but there are other values that are in the Torah that are, that at that time they didn't fully understand. And now that we do, we can kind of overturn that from another value in the Torah. That's another move that you could make. But you can also make the move that basically we see being made a lot of times, which is like, we're just going to misquote something from the Torah, and we're going to say that we're using the Torah to overturn the Torah, but actually the Torah that we're using to overturn the Torah isn't really the real Torah, because we misquoted it.
Exactly. And I think this is kind of the birth story of the wink. This is the birth story of the legal fiction, right? And maybe that's why we're here in Erevin. This is actually saying, you know what? You actually can't do it logically. It is impossible rationally, but don't let that stop you. Because this is the point at which you have permission to actually pretend to be doing it logically. This is where you do have to misquote. This is where you have to do a little sleight of hand. This is where you have to pretend. This is, and I'd love to hear you talk as a lawyer about the role of that moment in law, because my sense is that it's not about Jewish law, it's about all law. All legal systems have that technique, right?
Well, right. And yes and no. I mean, I think that in a functioning legal system, it tends to be very, very hidden. And the question is, though, are we talking here within a functioning legal system, or are we talking here about a time in which the existing legal system was unstable and they needed to replace it, and they wanted to do it in some way that connected it to tradition? But when we're having this conversation, I'm thinking about the very recent Supreme Court case that made the Title VII of the employment discrimination law applicable to people, to gay and lesbian, transgender folks. And it's based on this statement that says in Title VII that says that discrimination isn't allowed because of sex.
Right.
Now, everybody knows that when they wrote that, they weren't trying to protect gay and lesbian, transgender people at all. And if you asked them, even the progressive ones, many of them would have said, no, that's not what it's about. It was about women. And actually, you know, the interesting legal history of that particular phrase, because of sex, was that the Republicans, it was originally just about race and national origin and whatever. And in an attempt to destroy it, to kill the bill, the Republicans added because of sex into it.
Wow.
Because they thought that people would be like, well, we're not going to expand this to women. I mean, come on, like that would be opening up a real can of worms. And then they did it anyway, you know. And so the whole protection of women snuck into this bill, which was supposed to be a race-based civil rights bill in the first place. So it's not even clear that most of the people were even caring that much about women, you know, much less gay and lesbian, transgender folks. And so anyway, so then they say, and now, but you hear progressives today saying, and me first among them, you know, but much more important legal thinkers than me, like I heard Preet Bharara talking about this the other day on his podcast, that people say, well, of course that's the correct reading, because there's a logical argument, which is ironclad logic, right? And this was the logic that actually carried the day in that case with Justice Gorsuch, who's a conservative, right? Which is that if discrimination because of sex is not allowed, and you are not hiring this woman because she loves a woman, as opposed to not hiring this woman because she loves a man, or you would have hired a man that loves this woman, but not the woman that loves this woman, that of course you're discriminating because of sex. Now, that is absolutely ironclad, fantastic logic, right? But everybody knows that that's not really what the law meant when it was passed, or it certainly wasn't what people intended it to mean. And so you could say, well, they screwed up, they should have written the law better. And that's absolutely, you know, in a way, the right response. But, you know, it's also clear that what's going on there is are just clever arguments on both sides. And this particular clever argument carried the day, you know, in part because it was so clever that the conservative guy couldn't find his way out of it, or, you know, maybe really did want to protect people on the basis of sexual orientation, and so was able to figure out a way how to do that and still be conservative, you know, whatever I don't know what's happening in Justice Gorsuch's mind, you know, but yeah, you know, but it's this kind of argumentation, and like, you know, if you locked everybody into a room and just said, okay, nobody's ever going to hear about any of this, we're just talking as lawyers, like, you know, let's just kind of, what really happened here, you know, and everybody would say like, well, that's not, you know, that was a clever argument, as opposed to like, of course, that was what the law means, right?
Right. In last week's discussion of Helms, was it last week?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
No, 2 weeks ago.
Two weeks ago.
We were talking about Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. But actually, on the podcast, it's a long time ago because we changed the
right. So the idea of Helm stories is coming back to mind. This case, Gorsuch's logic, there's a Helmness about it. But of course, we're going to grab it because it comes out the way we want it to come out. But there is a certain Helm nature to it. And let's remember that these Helm stories, which are logical but ridiculous, were meant to parody the rabbis. They were a parody of the Talmudic logic used to do things that were obviously not founded in the tradition. Right? And is machinations the right word? Whatever. Anyway, I forget where we jumped off of, but okay, I think we're going to soon be out of time, but where the text goes next is it actually demonstrates one possible way to actually prove that something that's impure is pure.
Right. And this same exact example was given in last week's text. We didn't get to it, in part because we knew we were going to do this text and we didn't need to do it twice. But this example was given both times to say, you don't understand what that looks like. Let me give you an example. Or maybe not that was the intent, but or the intent is for this Rabbi Ravina to show off a little. But, he says, well, I can do that.
Are we going to go there this week?
Oh, do you want to not?
Either way.
I think we could take a couple more minutes.
Okay, great.
So Ravina says, well, I can do that. I can purify the creeping animal, the sherets, from the Torah. So let me show you this reasoning. Just as a snake kills people and kills animals and thereby increases impurity in the world.
Right. And let's remember that a snake is not itself impure. But
right, so a snake is something pure that kills and then causes impurity because dead corpses are impure. Right. So the snake is pure. A sheret, which does not kill anybody, so it's not increasing any impurity in the world. It must be pure, right? But and so the Gemara rejects this and says, no, that's not so. That's wrong. That's a unreasonable argument. It's not a kal vachomer, or what's translated as a fortiori argument, which basically says we can take a kind of easier case and learn from it to a harder case. It says it's not that, because we have another example of a thorn, which is pure, right?
Yeah.
And a thorn causes injury and death, but everybody knows that the thorn's not impure, so that can be true for a snake as well. Right, meaning that we have different. Is that?
That's a really thick proof. I'm not sure we were able to get that across in the translation. It really requires some unpacking. Yeah. Okay, shall we try it a little bit outside?
Yeah.
Okay. So Ravina says, yeah, prove that something that's impure is pure, or pure that's impure using the Torah. Yeah, I can do that. This is what it looks like. So he says, here we go. We know that a snake, which is itself pure. Okay, I'll say differently. A snake is deadly and kills people or animals by biting them, right, with its, okay. And after it kills a person, let's say, that dead body is impure because corpses are impure. Right. So if a snake, which causes impurity all over the place, is itself nevertheless pure, which we know that a snake is, then shouldn't an animal like a sheretz, which doesn't kill, because a sheretz is not deadly, it doesn't kill, and since it doesn't kill, it doesn't produce impure corpses, shouldn't it all the more so be pure? Okay, so whenever I teach this text, at this point I say to my students, good proof? And they all go, yeah, that good proof, that good proof. And I think
what I say is but the Torah actually says specifically that a sheretz is impure.
Yeah, but didn't I just prove to you that a sheretz should be pure? Because if a snake is pure, even though it causes impurity, shouldn't a sheretz, which doesn't cause impurity, shouldn't that be pure by deduction? Yeah, it should. Even though the Torah says it is by definition. So all of a sudden you've created this contradiction in people's minds, but the proof looks convincing. But there's a sleight of hand in it. And I think the Talmud is organized in such a way as to teach you how to think and to kind of lure you into a hole of not having thought deeply enough. And it wants you to fall into that hole just so it can wrap you on the knuckles and say, hey, you fell for it. You need to be a better thinker, or you need to learn how to do this by understanding what I just did to you. I just pulled the wool over your eyes because what I just did was actually illogical. It appears logical, And without thinking really hard about it, everyone's going to go, oh yeah, wow, yeah, that makes sense. But there's a fault in the logic, and the fault is revealed by the thorn. Okay, what's the issue with the thorn? A thorn, everybody knows that anything that grows is pure.
Uh-huh.
A thorn is a growing thing.
Mm-hmm.
A thorn can cause death. Think like Sleeping Beauty, and was it Sleeping Beauty where she gets pricked by the thorn and whatever? Okay.
Yeah.
So
Or an
imagine
apple.
whatever it was. Okay, well think of a thorn as being deadly. A
Right.
thorn can be deadly. You can be scratched by a thorn from a poisonous bush and die. Okay,
Right.
we know that's a fact. We know that the thorn is pure.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's just if those two things are a fact, that a thorn can kill and increase impurity in the world by
Mm-hmm.
creating corpses, but we know it's impure.
It's pure.
Sorry, we know it's pure. Then we realize, if we think of the thorn, we realize that the status, the pure, impure status of something actually has no bearing on whether it produces impurity in the world. So we realized we sort of got the wool pulled over our heads when we were led to believe that increasing purity in the world was a characteristic of something that must be impure. But actually, those two things are separate, and you can't deduce anything about the nature of something from what it does in the world. Okay. But the fact that when you read the text and you listen, you go, oh yeah, that sounds right. I think it's, even though the text then says, no, that's a bad proof,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's suggesting this is how we do it.
Mm.
It's actually a trick.
Mm.
The skill that you need to make the tradition better, to make the world better, is actually the willingness to sometimes get out of a corner that the tradition or the world doesn't let you out of. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, although I want to kind of like at a later time, I want to like pick this up maybe next time, in 2 weeks, but because my question at the end of the day is like, who's the Talmud saying in this story? Who's the hero and who's the idiot? Basically, like, because I when Ravina gives this proof and then the Talmud quickly slams it down, my question is like, possibly number one, they're just saying Ravina's kind of stupid, like this is a stupid proof and we can show it. Option number two is like, the wise, Simchus is kind of the hero, the wise student. It was like a wise guy, yeah, he could come up with 150 proofs for something but they were all easily like, able to be kicked down. Or, the point is to give 150 proofs because then you can maybe kick down one or two, but it's overwhelming and that's what we need to do. Or you should be more explicit about it. Like the problem with Ravina is he's got this cockamamie logic as opposed to some of those other stories that we've done where the people just misquoted the Torah, and like you could easily have the Talmud come back and say, but that is not so. You misquoted the Torah. That would be an easy way to defeat the proof, but the Talmud doesn't do that. So what the Talmud is doing here is it's knocking down the proof of this kind of like, like extended logic, kind of Chelm-like logic, but it's accepting these proofs that are misquotations. And I think that's like a really interesting, what's the agenda there?
Yeah, we should probably put a sticky here because I have lots of ideas. I don't have a lock on this section of the text. It's always vexed me. Why does the Talmud say, no, that's not a good proof? My sense is that this is the classroom part of the text. This is the place where the text is showing you how to overturn the Torah. And it's saying none of the ways that you can overturn the Torah are actually logical. But when you actually do it, everyone's going to go, oh yeah, okay. But I don't know. We'll see.
All right. Well, to be continued. That was great. So thanks, Benay, and we'll see you next week. Oh, and I say that we'll see everybody next week with Ruth Calderon, which is really exciting. And so people should spread the word.
Great. And then the week after that, we're going to look at how Rabbi Meir got to be Rabbi Meir and how you can become one of these people who can overturn the Torah, say that which is yes is no, and the no's are yeses.
Amazing. And maybe what we'll see there is the difference between Rabbi Meir, who is not described as trotting out 48 or 150 proofs or whatever, is just kind of known and acknowledged that God says, he was the greatest. And maybe we'll be able to see some of maybe how Rabbi Meir is different from some of these students that are described.
I love it.
All right, see you next time.
All right, thanks.
Bye.